Madam President, I rise today to speak in favor of a principle that should unite us all. The principle of Internet tax freedom. One of the great blessings of our modern economy is the productivity, is the entrepreneurial spirit that the Internet has created. The ability of anyone with an idea to jump online, to communicate, to create a business, to reach the world. And one of the reasons that the Internet has been such an entrepreneurial haven is that Congress has wisely decided to keep it free from taxation, not to subject the Internet to taxation. Well, Madam President, unfortunately, we are at the precipice of that long tradition changing. If the Senate refuses to take action, the Internet will be taxed this November. For a decade and a half, Americans have been able to use the Internet all across the country free of taxes. And Republicans and Democrats have agreed on this basic principle. You know, there's not a lot of agreement in this town on much of anything, including what time of day it is. And yet on Internet taxes, in 1998, President Bill Clinton signed the law banning Internet taxes. Congress has extended it 3 times in 2001, 2004, and 2007. Today, there is a bipartisan coalition on the record to keep the Internet tax-free. The senior Democratic senator from New York and the senior Democratic senator from Wisconsin both publicly support keeping the Internet free from taxation. Conservatives in the Senate, such as the junior Republican senator from Utah, the junior Republican senator from Florida, and the senior Republican senator from Louisiana, agree as well. There are 52 co-sponsors in the Senate on the bill by the senior Democratic senator from Oregon, who is here with us, to keep the ban on Internet taxes. This should be easy. This should be a matter of easy agreement, because rarely is there an issue that has united parties so broadly as keeping the Internet tax-free. Yet, unfortunately, this session of the Senate has also seen politicians who want to extend sales taxes to the Internet, who want to subject small businesses, mom and pops, businesses started by people just wanting to build a business, to crushing sales taxes from 9,600 jurisdictions nationwide. Madam President, I am passionate in saying we should fight against taxing the Internet. And we should not open the door to Internet taxes. The average tax rate right now on telephone services and other voice services is 17%. The average tax rate on cable and video services is 12%. Madam President, if this Senate doesn't act, you're going to see consumers in states like Montana and South Dakota and Massachusetts on November 1st begin paying taxes for having basic Internet service. Those state laws are already in effect and will go into effect. On Internet services, I would note for the senators that represent Montana and South Dakota and Massachusetts, come November 2nd, which I might note is right before an election day, anyone in those states should be prepared to answer questions from their citizens why the Senate stood by and let taxes be raised on their citizens just for having an Internet connection. Americans are struggling to pay their bills in the Obama economy. Life has gotten harder and harder for working men and women in this country. Life has gotten harder and harder for the most vulnerable among us, for young people, for Hispanics, for African Americans, for single moms. The last thing we should be doing is playing politics and jacking up taxes on people accessing the Internet. Now, I would note that the United States House of Representatives has already acted. On July 15th, the House voice voted H.R. 3086, the Permanent Internet Tax Freedom Act. It had 228 co-sponsors. My friend, Senator Wyden, has introduced the Senate version of it, S. 1431. It has 52 co-sponsors, including 18 Democrats. This ought to be something where we stop playing games and say, let's all come together and agree, don't tax the internet. Yet, unfortunately, we're not in that situation. Unfortunately, we're seeing an objection to the House passed bill, to a bill that has the support of a majority of senators. Why? The only reason is because there's hope that by holding the Internet Tax Freedom Act hostage, it can become a vehicle to impose sales taxes on transactions over the internet, to impose sales taxes on every small business. And you know, I would note one of the wonderful things, it used to be if you wanted to start a small business, if you're a single mom and you wanted to start a small business and you wanted to make something, you wanted to sit down and make something, whether it is a computer program or sweaters for dogs or anything else. It used to be that to create a small business took time, it took money, it took infrastructure. You had to have in place warehouses and distributors. You had to have a mechanism to sell your products. You know the great thing about the internet? If you're a single mom and you've got an idea to start a business, you can put up a website, and with FedEx, you can deliver anywhere in the country. And anyone all over the country can go, and if you have an idea, let me tell you, my cousin had an idea to sell scarves. She thought she had some good design ideas. My cousin, Beatriz, she worked with her best friend to design scarves, put up a website, and suddenly you can sell all over the country. Well, what would the internet sales tax do? It would say that when you start your business, if you start getting customers, you've got to collect taxes in 9,600 jurisdictions all over the country. And you know, if the school district across the country changes its tax rate from 4.5% to 4.75%, you got to know that and collect that differential tax. This doesn't make any sense. We should stand together united in protecting the entrepreneurial haven that is the internet. We should stand united against taxing the internet. Now, I would note that my friend, the senator from New Hampshire, has a long and passionate record on this issue as well, and I am happy to yield to her for a question on this important topic.
I thank the senator from Texas. Madam President, I thank the
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you. I thank the senator from Texas for coming to the floor to talk about this incredibly important issue to the American people. And isn't it true that for 16 years, the Internet Tax Freedom Act has prevented politicians nationwide from using the web as a piggy bank and has helped commerce thrive by keeping it free from burdensome tax restrictions? And isn't it true that by making this permanent, the way the House bill does and the way that the bill that my colleague from Oregon, his bill that has been offered that has 52 co-sponsors in the United States Senate does, we never have to allow the people of this country again to feel uncertainty that suddenly this great freedom we have on the internet, that they're going to be taxed when they access the internet, or that somehow we're going to use the internet as a way to raise money and a way to hurt e-commerce. I would ask that of my colleague from the state of Texas and ask, is this all true, that if we can pass the House bill right now, which is similar to the bill offered by my colleague from Oregon, we can give the American people that certainty that we're not going to tax what they're doing on the internet.
I thank my friend from New Hampshire, and I would note that she is exactly right. We have the ability to do something productive, something that doesn't happen in Washington an awful lot. We have the ability right now to come together in a bipartisan way for the Senate to demonstrate that it can function productively to address the economic challenges in this country the way the House has. The House is doing their job. The House has passed this bill. It's the Senate that has refused to take it up for a vote. It is the Senate that's refusing to do its job, and we have an ability not just to protect the internet from taxes, but also to honor our word. How many members of this body on both sides of the aisle go to the tech community and say, we want to stand with tech. We want to stand for the entrepreneurial vibrancy of tech. And yet I would note anyone objecting to this right now is setting the stage for a massive internet tax. How many of us make the case to young people that we're standing for the future for young people, we're standing for greater opportunity, we're standing for the chance to help young people achieve the American dream? You know, young Americans 18 to 29 years old oppose an internet sales tax by 73% to 27%. And yet, if this body refuses to stand together in a bipartisan matter, we're telling young people what we say on the campaign trail is not backed up by action on the floor. We ought to come together on what should be a non-controversial bill, a bill that has passed 3 times before, a bill that was signed by President Bill Clinton, a bill that in this body is introduced by a senior Democrat. We ought to come together in a bipartisan way to say, we stand in unison protecting internet tax freedom. Accordingly, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 3086, which was received from the House. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read a 3rd time and passed. The motion to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from North Dakota.
I want to first off make a couple points which, as we talk about this, I think it's clear to identify who is the taxing authority. My distinguished and very learned constitutional scholar from the state of Texas knows well that the imposition doesn't come from this body. The imposition comes from states and local governments who have 10th Amendment sovereign rights. They have the ability to finance their own government. They have the ability to make those decisions. Congress has the right to make decisions on their ability based on a concept that Congress ultimately has the obligation to control and to deal with interstate commerce. And only in the rarest of circumstances, when interstate commerce is critically involved, has Congress stepped up. And it's very rare that this body or that any previous Congress has actually dictated the constraints of that sovereign right of states and local governments under the 10th Amendment to impose their own taxes. I can tell you the 4Rs Act is probably one of the most glaring examples. During a time in the 70s when the railroads were struggling and different kinds of transportation organizations were struggling, we saw this body step up with a unified approach to improving the railroads. And guess what? The railroads got better. And the states now know what the constraints are, established by this body, very limited, on their ability to do centralized assessments on the railroads. We saw it in something called Public Law 86-272 regarding income tax, a very narrow exemption to those sovereign rights. And yes, the Internet Tax Freedom Act is an exercise of this body's Commerce Clause responsibility to take a look at what's in the best interest of moving forward. But let's not forget, what we are doing is a very interesting balancing authority, very interesting balance and responsibility to improve interstate commerce. And so when my distinguished colleague suggests that this body is imposing any tax, That clearly is a misstatement of the facts today. There is no locality, there is no state organization or state body that is required to impose any tax on the internet or required to impose any tax on sales tax. And so, yes, I believe we too need to address the internet tax moratorium, which expires on November 1st. But we also need to have a discussion in this context of Commerce Clause responsibility to give the states the right to decide whether they are, in fact, going to collect state and local taxes and use taxes. And I would remind you, the collection responsibility is on the use tax for remote sales. Congress's responsibility and failure to meet that responsibility of creating an opportunity to level the playing field for Main Street businesses. What do I say? I tell you that if you are selling a widget in North Dakota and you have bricks and mortar and you participate in the society, you provide dollars for the schools, you provide scholarship dollars, you collect a sales tax. But if you're a remote seller taking advantage of the same marketplace and competing directly against that Main Street business, you no longer have that responsibility. And so to suggest that this body, by doing any of this, would be imposing any taxes on mom and pop ignores the facts that the imposition of this tax comes from state and local governments who all too often, my friends on the other side of the aisle, say closer to the people, the more responsive those state governments are. I would suggest that in the great state of Texas, the current governor is Republican, certainly has the ability to decide tax policy. The legislatures are Republican and certainly can decide whether they want to do any imposition of tax. And so with all of that in mind, Madam President, I object.